First of all, I do actually want to thank Kate and congratulate her and Lisa and Rob and Clay and Gabriella. Give them a hand. What a great class. Now, this panel is supposed to be about resources and funding, but I think, and it's a perfect twin of the previous one, but as was made, I think, abundantly clear to me by the last group and through my career, funding only is the end of the equation. It's got to be a political, social, communications, organizing strategies to go, and then you get the funding. So I hope we're going to touch up that. We've heard a lot about the what and the why and the where of restoration of our harbor. I hope we're going to talk, we've got the three experts here to talk about the how, which will lead to the when. I'm going to go off topic just a little bit, because I went to an excellent event last night. My good friend wrote a book called The Second Amendment, a biography. And his name is Michael Waldman. Go buy it. It's an amazing book. And I'm going to talk about it for 2 seconds because I think it's a useful lesson for all of us when we're talking about change. We're all about social change. We want to change the world, don't we? What the book points out is wonderfully is that for 200 years in our country, the Second Amendment was ignored, and you went to Dodge City, good old Dodge City in the 19th century, dusty, you could see Gary Cooper walking down the street. There was a great sign right outside Dodge City that said, "Leave your guns outside Dodge City." So, someone with what I like to figure, I figured out the 3 P's early this morning for social change. It's a powerful idea, it's persistence, and it's passion. And you know who had those 3 ingredients? The NRA. About 40, 50 years ago, they said we're going to change the world. I mean, I'm no expert in sociology, but I think this is not the NRA group speaking to right now, right? But we've got to respect what they did. They changed the world in the way they wanted it to change. They had a big idea, a powerful idea. They were persistent. God knows they were persistent, and they were passionate. And God knows they were really passionate. And when Heller came down, the decision that changed everything just a few years ago, that's when, before that, we didn't have a right to arm ourselves as an individual, thanks to Justice Scalia. But it wasn't a surprise when he wrote that. So they really changed the dynamic. Everyone thought a little bit differently about gun control by the time 2008 came around and Heller came around. So it's a lesson for us all. I'd like to tell you just a couple of things about what we do. Kate asked me to just talk about, for just 2 seconds, about the MWA, because and you've heard a little bit about it already. We had I saw my friend Michael Merrill up there. One of the great changes we were able to bring them forward that I think really forward the cause of restoration of the harbor was the comprehensive waterfront plan, which we helped to get the legislation passed, worked with city government and many of you intensively to make sure restoration and the agenda you guys championed so well for so many years was a part of that. That was a change moment for us and for all of us. You heard Lilo talk about the good work that the Harbor Coalition has done and still continues to do. I think our resources are dwindled a little bit. We're not as big as we were, but we're still as needed as we were. As Lilo was just saying, a unified voice in Washington for this harbor is still a necessary thing. I think some of the accomplishments of this coalition that we put together and were profound. The Sandy bill had restoration language in it because of the Harbor Coalition. There are projects, Minish Park in Jersey, some in Jamaica Bay, that were funded or allowed for funding for restoration because of the Harbor Coalition. There will be DIY, the Department of Interior grants that will be funded for restoration projects outside of where Sandy hit because of the Harbor Coalition. So not bragging about the Harbor Coalition too much, but I am saying that it's an important thing, an important vehicle for us to have a Washington voice, whether it's through HEP, whether it's the MWA, through some way. And you heard also a little bit, I think a couple of shout outs about WEDGE, Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines. That is, in shorthand, is Great Harbor Design a la LEED. It's a LEED for the waterfront. It's the questions we heard this morning were, well, what would an average homeowner do to make their property more sustainable? What does an industrial owner do to make their waterfront more sustainable? Well, this is going to be a consumer-friendly way for them to find out. We just had a wonderful meeting with Board 1 that we're sitting right now, Community Board 1, where they surprised us, said, we're going to pass a resolution. We love this. This is a tool for us to tell the developer what we want in our waterfront. So as it's not even done yet, so it's not even half done yet. This year we'll have a first version. But I encourage all of you, I don't know if Mike Porto came back or if he's here. Oh, there's Mike Porto. If you want to get involved with the Design Guidelines Project, Mike's up there. He's our point person on that. So that's a little bit of what we do with these change agents. So here I have 3 experts in social change for the environment. And there's extensive biographies that you can read. But you have Chris Eppie, the Director of Environmental and Energy Programs at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And, you know, a long, great career, being a champion. That persistency, that thing I talked about, that is personified. You look up in the dictionary, you see Chris Eppie's picture. And, you know, we all were wonderfully surprised by the $60 million commitment by the Port Authority. Well, it wasn't a surprise to Chris, because he sweat and bled for that for years, and he works for that. And sorry, I hope we can learn a bit more about the how that happened. You know, I'd like to be hearing from Nancy Keefe from the Rockefeller Foundation, Managing Director of the Resiliency Program. And in a brief couple of years that she's been there, it's been a whirlwind of activity and programs that she's been thrusting forth on us and making us react to. We're working Jamaica Bay, the Rebuild by Design that we're all so excited and talking about. So we'll talk about a little bit about how that happened. And more importantly, as I was talking to a reporter on Sunday about an exclusive about the RBD, I said, well, you know, it's great stuff, and I was talking about each of the attributes of some of the programs, but the hardest work really starts now, getting this stuff built and implemented, and let's put the how of what we're going to do to get those things done. And last, and certainly not least, is Venetia Lannon, who's our regional director for the Department of Environmental Conservation. I love Venetia, but I love her resume almost as much. Department of Sanitation, working to create the solid waste management program for all of us. Very good. Then over at EDC, changing the city's mind, changing our perspective about what maritime should and shouldn't be for the city of New York. And now I think we're going to change at DEC. So I think the order is now for Chris to lead off. We have 2 with this, one, no slide. No slide. So speak and we shall listen. Chris, give me a hand.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm here this afternoon to talk about the Port Authority's Hudson Raritan Estuary Resources Program. And the program dates all the way back to 2001. Actually, the Board of Commissioners approved the program at the same board meeting that they approved the sale of the World Trade Center to Silverstein, which was back in July. I remember in the early fall, we had a big ceremony on Staten Island with Governor Pataki and a number of elected officials announcing this wonderful program. And then the next week was 9/11. And nothing happened for a couple of years. You know, we didn't even know if we were going to have a program at one point. So I think our first actual acquisition was in 2002, which was the Glisson-backed property on the North Shore of Staten Island, where actually a number of improvements were made over the years, and Governor Cuomo just dedicated that park recently, actually at the beginning of this week, as Heritage Park on Staten Island. So the first phase of what we've called the Hudson Raritan Estuary Resources Program has taken us to today. And over that period of time, we've acquired actually 18 properties, 9 in each state. It's nice the way that works out, 9 in each state. And approximately 400 acres of property. And these properties cover not only just land preservation, but opportunities for public access. And when the board put this program together, I mean, it was actually guided primarily for land preservation and public access, because the thought was that the Port Authority's capital program and its operations in total have some impact on the estuary and the environment of the region, and so this would be a good program to have. So over that first portion of the program, we've partnered with the Trust for Public Lands, primarily for properties on the New York side, and with the New York, New Jersey Baykeeper for properties in New Jersey. And we've been able to acquire properties that had have put most of their emphasis on large tracts of land like portions of Dismal Swamp in New Jersey, Pouch Camp on Staten Island, Mount Loretto Woods on Staten Island, and we've done a lot of work in the Meadowlands as well, where we've had a memorandum of understanding with the Meadowlands Commission to purchase up to $10 million worth of properties within the Meadowlands. So when we got to what is approximately the end of our pot of gold, which to date in the first phase we've spent approximately $54 million, we wanted to reauthorize this program, and we weren't sure we were actually going to get it reauthorized. The first time around, it was a different time. There weren't as many pressures on the Port Authority's capital program as there is today. But Pat Foy and the Board of Commissioners very recently just unanimously reauthorized this program at the same levels of funding as it had been the first time around. So we're looking forward to hopefully another great round of acquisitions. I mean, basically what we're trying to do is take property that's in danger of development as identified by the Harbor Estuary Program and lock it up in perpetuity through conservation easements. And you know, people, land is the only thing that lasts. I mean, that's a famous quote. And so, you know, we're moving ahead again with our acquisitions. These acquisitions are for properties that are in private hands, where we have willing sellers, and where they're on the Harbor Estuary Program's list of priority sites for acquisition. And we look forward to continued successful program. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, Nancy Keith. Yay.
So I changed my talk a little bit at the break because the Rockefeller Foundation had come up a lot, and I realized this would be probably confusing to a lot of you to try to figure out what it was we were doing. So just real quickly, I want to give you some context for all of this work that you've heard a bit about. Since I came to the foundation about 2.5 years ago, we built up a portfolio that we call Resilience by Design. And advancing. No, that one's the.
So if you point
The
it
next
right,
one here.
right and point it this way, direction.
The one on the right.
Sorry.
I think you're doing it right.
Okay.
Who's next one here?
Next slide.
There we go. And where this program came from is it's got very mixed heritage, but one thing is back in 1958, the foundation made a small grant to a relatively unknown community activist at the time named Jane Jacobs. And she used that grant money to write and then eventually publish her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And the whole Resilience by Design portfolio, and very especially Rebuild by Design, has this quote of hers at its heart, that cities have the capacity or the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. So keep that in mind. We're talking about restoration today, but one of the reasons Rebuild by the Design phase so far, which is the design phase, has been so successful. Why? Yesterday you had Senator Schumer, Governor Cuomo, Mayor de Blasio, the whole New York delegation standing together speaking resilience is because we had so much community engagement. And they worked so hard to align it and complement it with the state-run community engagement programs and the nonprofit community engagement. Like, if you don't have that part, it really won't work and it won't be resilience or resilient. And the other sort of motivator was Daniel Burnham, the other great urbanist of the mid-20th century. This is another big motivation behind this portfolio we lead, which is make no little plans. They've got no magic to serve people's blood and probably won't be realized. make big plans, aim high and hope and work. And so this whole portfolio is about very large landscape scale projects, where project is too small a word to encompass this. Instead of a lot of little small grants, we supported partnerships with HUD, partnership or collaborations with the Corps of Engineers, with the state of Mississippi and all of or Louisiana and all their partners to try to do things that nobody quite knows how to do, but that need to be done. Because it's really all about scale and resilience. This is our mission is to improve the life of poor and vulnerable people, and we know we need to do that by building resilience, and we know we need to do it at scale. So the portfolio, I'm going to skip this because of time. And the third motivation behind this is sort of the father of floodplain management, Gil White, and he reminded us back in his dissertation in 1942 that floods are acts of God, but flood losses are largely acts of man, and this is where design comes in. We can design our way out of having huge losses, even if we can't do anything about the floods. So all of this portfolio is about changing paradigms from what dominated the middle of the 20th century forward, which is the pave, pipe, pump, and prevent approach to flood protection, which did a lot of good. It allowed urbanizations of deltas and coastal cities and had all these unintended consequences. Increased risks of devastating floods, subsidence, climate change, social isolation, inequality, and ecological damage, and everything on the right, which is the whole idea behind Rebuild by Design and the other two projects I'm going to show you quickly. Multiple lines of defense, long-term safety by making room for the water, improved quality of life, new economic and development opportunities. What you don't know is that in addition to the thing on the right, Rebuild by Design, which was announced yesterday, you've heard a lot about the SCAPE design. You might not know the Meadowlands got a big grant. Hoboken, Jersey City, and Weehawken got a grant. Hunts Point got a grant. Bridgeport, Connecticut got a little grant. There's Structures of Coastal Resilience, which Catherine Sievert talked about. That's another big part of this portfolio. Then there's a big project in Louisiana, which is a design competition, and they're all part of this portfolio. So that's structures. Catherine's focused on Jamaica Bay. And the only thing I want to say about this is there's a lot of the foundation's focus has been on Jamaica Bay, and Peter Wepler talked about it in a previous panel. And the reason is it's a perfectly sized, again, small landscape within which to try to do something different. That is to think about it as a landscape that has a lot of different values that need to be advanced at the same time, even though the sort of regulation of those values are from different federal agencies coming through different parts of the state and the city. But if we keep looking at it in isolation and in silos, we won't be able to achieve the values that we want. So with the Corps, in a collaboration, we've been trying to think about, help them through our Structures project and through the Science and Resilience Institute of Jamaica Bay, which we had set up before Sandy, how to look at this landscape as a whole and move the public agencies forward, have some decision support through a large grant to the RAND Corporation, and then work with the federal regulators, including OMB if we have to try to make the decision-making support what we want to do at that landscape scale. I won't talk about the Changing Course project. It's just got a, say it's a small goal, which is to figure out how to realign the lower Mississippi to bring sediment down and to rebuild the coastal wetlands. And then Rebuild by Design, the winners of the 10 were announced. The 10 finalists were announced yesterday, and 6 got money from HUD. What I would say is you should be really amazed that HUD is using almost $1 billion to fund many projects that would typically either never get money in a million years from anybody, or what would have been typically be Army Corps of Engineers type projects. And the amount of coordination at the federal level was through the Sandy Task Force that the HUD Secretary ran was out of sight from most of us, but was very strong. And so you might not know that the SCAPE project for Staten Island, which did get funding, there was a similar proposal for Jamaica Bay, and that didn't get funding back at a previous stage. It got knocked out, but they were quite aware of all the other work we were coordinating and doing in Jamaica Bay, so it's quite possible that that will be included in some of the final design or proposals for what moves forward by the Army Corps of Engineers there. So I suspect there's a little bit of strategic voting at the cabinet level for what should move through the HUD rebuild by design pipeline, with a good eye towards, well, maybe that will just be part of the Sandy restoration projects. But anyway, we now have 6 very live and lively projects, and I will add for rebuild by design, the foundation has just funded New York University's Institute for Public Knowledge to carry forward Rebuild by Design 2.0 to provide the gap funding between now and when the grantees from HUD, who are New York State, New York City, and New Jersey, till when they finally get through their procurement and can start to fund whoever it is they're going to fund, which doesn't have to be the design teams, but we'll be working between now and then and hope that they will keep the integrity of the design idea and keep working with the design teams. So that's how that keeps going, as well as helping to support some of the other ideas that didn't get the HUD money this time around, but were really good ideas. I want to end with this because I think this is what this is all about in our neighborhood, as well as in Louisiana. This is from a former deputy mayor of New Orleans. We who live on the waters, deltas, or on the edges of great oceans are the most immediate laboratory for innovation and change, and our success or failure will be the symbol of the world's ability to accomplish great things, or not. But for all coastal cities, our future is not just about survival, it's about redemption. It's about getting this right for now and for generations to come. And it's because of that sentiment that we decided to fund at a large level for us, because even though the foundation is big and it would look like a lot of money to many of you who are fundraising all the time, I come from your world, I was on self-money. We're not a lot of money compared to what is needed. And so we're making these really big bets to try to leverage the billions that the federal government has the right and the obligation and the trust of the American public to put out. But it has to start being used differently. The leadership of all these agencies know that, but they often can't spend their money in the same way that foundations like ours can spend. So that's what this portfolio has been about. And we're, as Roland says, almost, not necessarily the hard part, but the action part now starts with Rebuild by Design and somewhat with structures. And we're almost to that phase with the Changing Course project in New Orleans. Thank you very much.
Anisha?
Hello. Yeah, just put it back. So our panel is on securing commitments and resources for action, and I think when you think about, so how do you get people to care? How do you get money? I think it's there are 2 ways, as with many things. There are carrots and there are sticks. And I think when I think on the carrot side, I think about how do we get people to value restoration, and as a regulator on the stick side, I think about what we're going to make you do restoration, and I'm going to talk a little bit about mitigation. So I think on the carrot side, and getting people to understand, why is restoration important? Why do we do restoration? And I think you're the choir out there, and I don't need to preach to you as to why we do restoration. But having worked at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, I had the opportunity to work with a lot of maritime businesses and a lot of people for whom the question, I wouldn't say that specifically about maritime businesses, but speaking to a lot of people, developers, why is it important to restore the harbor? I mean, I think that that we all have a mission to make that question easy to answer, and really almost in an elevator pitch, if you will, why restoration is important. And I think that we need to put it in the terms that are people can relate to in self-interested ways. And we talked, I know Nancy, you were going to talk, so I'll pick up a little bit on what you were going to speak about. I think that it's important we talk about valuing ecosystems and we talk about ecosystem services. And I think this is an interesting concept and I think it's something we really need to explore. It's also, I want to be aware, a little bit of a double-edged sword because thinking about the natural world as resources is somewhat what got us into the jam of a degraded environment in the first place, so I just want to keep that in mind. But if we think about how do we value wetlands, for example, and we think about the services that they provide. They capture nutrients from runoff. They serve as habitat for and oxygen supply for breeding fish. And they capture greenhouse gases and store greenhouse gases. And I would urge everyone to look at NYC Audubon's publication, this most recent publication. There's a really great synopsis of the value of marsh habitat. But I think then if you think about tracing that back up to who are the people and who are the funders that care about those services? So obviously in terms of preventing nutrients from getting into the waterways and pollutants from getting into the waterways, DEP and the clean water agencies care about those functions. And so I think green infrastructure and the funding that DEP is putting into green infrastructure is a great start, but are we making enough connection between green infrastructure and habitat restoration? I think there's further to go to make that more of an explicit marriage. I think in the realm of greenhouse gas sequestration, we're right at the beginning. I mean, I think we're thinking about that in forests, but I think we're just starting to think about that in terms of marshes, and could we make an argument in the harbor for how much greenhouse gases could be sequestered by marshes restored on a large scale, and look at the regional greenhouse gas initiatives, look at RGGI funding and NYSERDA funding and other kinds of urban heat island mitigation funding. When we start thinking about the role of wetlands and the services on a broad scale, I think greenhouse gases need to come into that. I think that, I don't see any commercial fisher people in the audience here today, but I think that especially in Region 2 in New York City, it's an audience that I really want to engage with more. I think that, all of the important commercial fish species on the Atlantic coast spend time in the waterways of New York City. At some point in their breeding cycle, they're either moving through here, or they're overwintering here, or they're breeding in some places. And I think making more of a connection between the value of that habitat to fisheries is another place, again, to try to pull in other creative sources of why do you care about restoration, and if you care about it, to bring your money to the table. I think resiliency is obviously, I think we've spoken enough about that today, but I think that is, again, that's a really interesting edge where we are in terms of thinking about how do natural systems, how do we value them in terms of providing shoreline protection. And Steve Zahn touched on it this morning. We're engaging in a pretty big effort at Spring Creek. I see I have 1 minute left, so I'll be quick. On Jamaica Bay to try to take a large-scale restoration effort. What's that? Okay. A large-scale restoration effort, which was undertaken by the Army Corps as part of a restoration project, and now working with the Army Corps and a number of stakeholders to say, how do we transform this project into a resiliency project? And I really would urge everyone in this audience to give us your ideas, because this is, not only is this cutting edge, but I think it's going to be, people are going to look at this to say, did this work? I know a lot of people on previous panels were afraid of white elephants. This could be the ultimate white elephant in terms of, we're going to design it, but we don't know how to make a restoration project, a resiliency project. But I think that the opportunity is fascinating to say, what kind of marsh grasses do the most to provide wave attenuation? There are different kinds. What kind of plantings in dunes have the deepest roots to hold dunes in place? So, those are just some examples of how do we understand nature as providing protection? And I think it's an emerging field, and we want your help. On the stick side, just very briefly, mitigation came up in our breakout group, and I think we shouldn't lose in the whole Sandy whirlwind of funding that's coming through sight of all the work that we were doing before Sandy on looking about how can we get the most out of our mitigation dollars. And we are working with the Army Corps and with a number of federal partners in an interagency team with the City of New York, who's looking to develop a mitigation bank. And I think most of you know what this is. Again, there's a really nice synopsis in the NYC Audubon publication. But so, as you know, if we permit projects all around the city, let's just take Domino Sugar on the East River. They're going to have certain impacts in their certain development site, and if they don't have room to do mitigation on their site, they would have to like wander off and try and find something with the Parks Department. This is time, it's money, it's frustration for the developer, which you know I think we need to be sympathetic to. But from the restoration side, it doesn't always lead to a great restoration. You have a one-off here, a one-off there. They don't always stick. So the idea of mitigation banking is to do a large-scale restoration effort, and then have an entity be able to sell those credits to, say, a Domino who just needs to do a small piece of mitigation. So the city is proposing a 68-acre site, is that right? Roughly speaking, out on Staten Island, a degraded wetlands complex at Sawmill Creek, where they're proposing to do a large-scale restoration, you know, reintroducing grasses, removing debris, really bringing a wetlands complex back to maximal ecological functionality. And then we assess that through a federally blessed process to say, okay, you've done this much restoration, you get this many credits, and then you can sell those credits to others who might have one-off small pieces that they need to do. Not without controversy, but I think very much worth pursuing. It's been pursued successfully in other parts of the country. But again, for when we run out of carrots and convincing you why you should care about restoration, I think it's important to make you do restoration on the stick side in a way that's cost-effective and has maximal ecological benefits.
I'll start with a couple of questions, but I'm sure, unlike the last panel, there are questions out there. We're still doing cards, or they're just doing hands now? Is that whatever you want? Yeah. Well, I'll start with Chris. Chris, my George is Chris Ward, so I know a little more than I should about the Port Authority, but it's a complex agency, yes, large, and with competing interests and dynamic. And how can you give either example, or how do you, for yours, which is to be honest, it's a tangential issue for most of the agency. How do you make sure that your bread is buttered, that the environmental issues, and what arguments do you use, or is just gentle persuasion and using your personality?
You know, it's interesting that you brought up ecological values, because that was one of the approaches that we've begun using on the sites that we've acquired. And I assure you, if you look at any of the more recent papers, and they're not exacting, but the actual selling prices are far less than what the ecological value would tell you in terms of monetizing those ecological values. So that's one of the persuasive arguments. But I must say that there was active discussion in the Finance Committee on reauthorizing this program. And in fact, you can go on the Port Authority website and you can find the video of the Finance Committee meeting on this subject, and you will see that there was very active discussion about this is mission creep and is this really part of the Port Authority's mandate. And you know, it was a heartfelt discussion by all commissioners, and in the end, they decided that yes, this is something that the Port Authority should be doing. So we were very gratified that that's the way it played out. But it is a very rigorous process. And then with every project, each one has to be authorized by the board again, and so you have to make the case every time you do a project.
I just have to add to that. I think that's one of the things I admire so much about the New York district of the Army Corps, is that is no longer a question for the Army Corps. You know, is this mission creep? You know, that restoration is really part of how the Army Corps conceives of its mission in New York Harbor. You know, it's one of the rings which we hope will never come undone. But I really just not to put down the Port Authority, but really to laud the Army Corps that it's you know, you don't need to debate it every time. It's like you are working in the harbor, you are gaining your livelihood out of the harbor, you are therefore naturally a steward of the harbor. And I think that's an impressive thing.
we had kind of, with due respect to my friends in the Army Corps, we had a meeting with Joe Seabold and the other folks saying that there's a question now, not from the region, frankly, but from headquarters, about whether restoration $70 can be used for restoration.
Right, because that's asking is restoration resilient, and is it a coastal protection? And that's a separate question, but I think in terms of the Corps' fundamental mission.
Absolutely. My point is vigilance, and because we've heard different things over different months from different folks in the Army Corps. So, but good points. Nancy, two questions. One for all of us as RBD goes forward. The transparency, as these decisions are made by the multi-agency task force at the federal level, is there a mechanism for us as citizen activists to understand if and how things are moving forward? How's accountability built into the program going forward, or is it? And then we saw Jane Jacobs, and you're sitting in a room full of modern-day Jane Jacobs. Who are the grassroots champions that are going to, through thick and thin, and there'll be hurdles, and there'll be impossible impediments and political quagmires and all sorts of things that these, the rule of thumb for me, as many is the 20-year rule. Anything worthwhile getting done in this region takes 20 years, and I've lived it and seen
Or
it.
400.
So tell me the transparency question about how we'll know how things are working, and the stakeholders, and who's going to be, and are they funded, are they going to be there for these projects to see them through on a grassroots level?
We'll keep your eye on Venetia, for the state of New York. First, there's a Rebuild by Design website, and if you wanted to, you could have kept a very close eye on the process so far. It's been pretty transparent, and there's been a lot of public engagement. And one of my favorite things is that, some communities just have almost professional public engagers, and they've been going all over the region talking about how nobody ever listens to them. If you keep track, it's like they're at every community engagement. But that's the minority. Now we're in a very tricky situation where HUD makes these grants to the state of New York, the state of New Jersey, the city of New York, and they actually don't have very strong legal authority to require that those jurisdictions use the grants for the specific designs that led to the winning of these awards. So that's why the foundation made this parallel grant to the Rebuild by Design teams to try to keep the pressure on so that the money is used for something very close to what the conceptual designs are for. Now, there will have to be changes as you move from conceptual design to the basic design stage. That's not what we're worried about, but we are worried about it going to something completely different. But it's now in the governor's pots and in the mayor's pots. And literally, it is Venetia's agency's money will become her money to manage for, you have NASA and Staten Island, right?
Not just that.
You have Staten Island, and I don't know who manages it for the Nassau County one, and then for New York City. So then it becomes their transparency more. And then we'll have the grant mechanisms aren't really set up for the soft money side of it, which will be funding the teams to stay together, to be able to keep providing some support to the public jurisdictions and for some of the community engagement, as well as for keeping reporters informed, to keep the activism going. So we can't make it happen, we can just help it to happen.
Well, and I hope you'll engage in the choir, because I think these folks are here to help in any way we can, to be political activists, to be sure these things happen. The transparency has been fantastic to date, but again, I think we're entering, as I say, the hard part, but more challenging, the political part. I can't help myself. I'll go back to that Second Amendment, but for Venetia, my question. Well, actually, I'm going to Paul Delay, who's not here, I don't think, the Riverkeeper, I heard him speak the other day, and he's cited a Gallup statistic that said, speaks to your communications point. He said, they do the same question every year. Would you weigh environmental benefits over economic benefit for you in terms of policy decisions, essentially? It's probably much more articulate than that. And it used to be like 70, 30, yes, I would sacrifice economics for a better environment. It's flipped almost entirely the other way. So it's back to that effectiveness of folks on the other side of the political spectrum winning the argument. Now, the Second Amendment is a morbid statistic, but for the first time this year, if the trend lines go, there'll be more people who will die of gunshot wounds than car accidents. Now that sounds horrible, but it's the silver lining there is that not that is that government regulation, innovative regulations, seatbelts, car bags, have actually greatly reduced the number of deaths via vehicle. So this comes back to mitigation biking, believe it or not. That's not been an innovation in our, as you were starting to talk about in your remarks, there's not been a hallmark, I think, in the environmental movement in terms of getting it done. Mitigation making, I know in New York has been, push-pull, are we going to get it done right? Can you speak to the why don't we have mitigation banking already? You worked elsewhere in other places, and what do you think? What's your analysis of what? Are there other ideas that we've been too timid about putting forward? Which were reeling off before, where I thought were very exciting sense. Maybe a new way of thinking about it. Should we look at ourselves in the mirror and say we've not been as innovative and proactive, maybe in other ways, to win the war? Maybe lose a battle or two here or there, but. Does that make sense to you? And can you speak to mitigation banking particularly or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, the question makes sense. I don't know, I can't think off the top of my head what else we aren't thinking about, but I know that, that a hallmark of government has not been innovation, that is for sure. And I think that we can always do more to be innovative and really to look to the private sector for that sense of there are no boundaries. I think in government we always try to, we always start from, oh, well, I can't do this because of this. And, but anyway, I mean, when it comes to mitigation banking, I think some of the tension in the past, and it's still there, is that there has been a sense that we don't want to make, the world easy for developers, and we don't want to make the world, we don't want to make it easy for people to have impacts to this precious resource in the first place, especially in the intertidal area where we've lost so much habitat over time. There was sort of, mitigation banking has been seen as sort of like, okay, well, I can just pay to destroy a wetland. That kind of a mentality, I think, has been part of the blockage, if you will, in the past. And, I think, again, it does come down to communications, that I think that it's important that we frame, that we don't look at developers or maritime businesses as enemies of the environment, and that developers don't look at DEC as an enemy of the economy. I think that, and it's kind of simplistic in Kumbaya, but I do think that it's true to say that, if you talk to 9 maritime business owners out of 10, they will say, I want to do the right thing by the environment. I value this water body. I care about the resource. I care about the fish. Tell me how to do it quickly. Tell me how I can do it right, and make it predictable for me to get a permit within a reasonable period of time. That's all I'm asking for. So I think there is part of it comes down to this kind of lack of trust on either side of the equation in some ways, that I think has really thwarted, it's certainly an innovative thinking about mitigation banking, in terms of that idea of just like, oh, you can just write a check and trash a wetland. That doesn't seem right. So.
Well, fair enough. I hope your
I
remarks.
want to come back
Yeah,
to
please.
where the innovation is and what causes what change. I think, I don't remember where the numbers lie now, but in terms of the decline in deaths from driving, I think you might also have to look at Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. That was one of the biggest changes and that was a social change from people stepping up and saying it's not okay for you to kill people on the highway because you want to drive drunk. Because we've had seatbelts for a really long time, and we've had, that was actually the only, after seatbelts, I don't think there's been much technology that has stopped highway deaths. We've not been able to get agreement socially to do the things technologically to stop highway deaths. We had seatbelts, and then we had airbags. the next thing you would do technologically is put in speed regulators on your vehicle, but we won't go for that. What the next thing that happened was the social resistance to, it's just socially acceptable to drive a truck. So there are a lot of parallels between that last bit and what is starting to happen now. The reason I put up all those historical figures is to make the point that in all of this portfolio that we're talking about, there aren't really any new big ideas. There's some new specific ideas, but no big ideas. We just socially weren't ready for it. And I think because of climate change and maybe for some other reasons, socially we're getting ready for the equivalent of mothers against destroyed shorelines. We're now.
Mothers against plastic.
Yeah, and we're ready to say New York is New York because it's on the water. We're not going to give up the shoreline. We're not going to retreat fully everywhere. But we also have to know that everybody can't live exactly the way they're currently living without any change. It's not feasible. The science doesn't support that. So there's going to have to be a lot of changes with going up, but also, so that's some sorts of innovation, but building out. That's what's exciting about some of the rebuild by design ideas is, we can take the edge out as opposed to us moving back. There's no place to really move back in the New York area. And lots of other ideas that are in there, but that starts with a social idea against no more hard edges that nobody really needs anymore. Like most of your members hardly any need a harbor that's deep, right? No, we just don't need a deep harbor.
Well, a couple of shippers might, but.
Given the miles.
Yeah, you have 500,
You don't need 500 miles of deep.
45, you're absolutely right, that's correct. All right, well, come on, raise some hands and let me hear some interesting questions or comments. I know it's been a long day. Nothing? There you go.
So just to jump off Anisha's idea of the mitigation bank, is there a possibility to connect that to the harbor restoration and acquisition targets that have been identified through the planning, as opposed to one bank managed by a single entity?
I haven't really thought about that, but yeah, I mean, you would think so. So you mean in terms of having that count towards the tech, or I'm not sure I understand your question.
But there's a series of priorities which have been identified
Right.
for restoration and acquisition, and what you're talking about needing to do is connect the funding, either restore or acquire those parcels of land. It goes to public funding like Chris's program, but your idea of taking the compensation, the compensatory mitigation off-site, presumably without a loss of function in the system, is you're bringing it in one place, and the bank's usually managed by a for-profit entity. Why not spread it out to the estuary and bring those dollar resources
Oh, right.
in places that you already identified as being key to restoring the ecosystem?
Yeah, that's another thing that I didn't mention. I do think that that's important, and I think it fits under a lot of what we've heard today, that there is, we need to be approaching this problem from every single angle we can think of, and I think mitigation banking is one, but that notion of us just taking one-off mitigations, I mean, we have a one-off mitigation with the transportation agency worth $3 million, so, trying to figure out a way to direct those dollars to individual projects, working through, and it is our hope, the Hudson Raritan, the HEP Restoration Committee I think is a terrific idea. It's something that I'm very keen on in the region. We send millions of dollars to the general fund of the state every year for, petroleum bulk storage violations and hazardous waste violations. And I think, in addition to mitigation for wetlands takings, I really would like to see more of those petroleum dollars come back into a restoration pot, because I think ultimately, that spilled petroleum ultimately gets into the water and gets into the waterways, and I think there needs to be a connection between that impact and restoration, and there needs to be a connection between where the impact is made and where the mitigation is done, rather than us just sending all this money to Albany. To be able to keep some of it dedicated for restoration, I think is important too.
And what I just wanted to add, in the the Staten Island project that will be funded by HUD, it really is a pilot. It's a very large-scale pilot, but if that works, there's many more miles of coastline where that would be appropriate habitat. And I think the idea of how you would get that funded would be through the Hudson Raritan Estuary Program, or as mitigation, as potential mitigation that would come through the DEC under normal funding lines, because there might not be any more extraordinary funding lines for that. But it's going to have to prove it's, as everybody knows, it's a large-scale pilot, and it's going to take some time to make sure that it works and we know how to sustain it. But then it should be something that could work over the decades and be part of mitigation for other things that are happening in the harbor.
Did you get a question there? No? No. Yes, sir.
How about Mothers for Better Digestion? We did a $500,000 study on the South Shore, and the second best solution to the nitrogen problem, to eutrophication issues, was improved nutrition, improved digestive health.
For people.
So we spend billions of dollars in Newtown Creek and billions of dollars on putting nitrification digesters in these big eggs. And then we spend millions of dollars putting wetlands on the fringe to get bacteria to digest nitrogen just before it hits the water body. Europeans have shown you can drop nitrogenous waste levels out of a human 25% through probiotic health.
Oh, how funny.
It's not funny.
20% is huge.
It's not funny. The EPA has passed rules for CAFO operations that force them to do probiotic placements into their feedstock for CAFO.
Well, I've always said that I thought that it was unfair that in the waste management world we put the responsibility of recycling on the resident. So maybe we need to put responsibility for wastewater management too on the resident.
To
Say,
tie-
you need to do a better job digesting your food.
So we look at the load of nitrogen coming in, and we find that the atmospheric deposition is going down beautifully, like 15% in 10 years
Where is this in Europe?
in New York Harbor.
Oh, sorry.
Atmospheric deposition is going down 15% in 10 years. Everybody says this is a great slope. Mileage is a large part of that. People aren't doing that for water quality. They're doing it because it costs less, they're driving less, they're being smarter. If people could just eat and be instructed and taught how to eat more healthy and a little bit more efficiently, 20% less, they'll spend less money, and we'll have less of a
I'm
load into
taking
the
this
harbor.
on. I think it does need to be. I think it needs to be on the Manhattan map. But food system, seriously, I mean, that's a pretty big
Well, actually, it's in our carbon model.
climate. Oh, it is. Yeah, that's it.
Although not the nitrogen part.
All right. Well, I believe New York State made yogurt the official snack food, so that's probably a step in the right direction, right?
I'm good controlling your. Go ahead, Nancy.
So I know we were really focusing on the restorations part, but I wanted to mention something. We funded the Nature Conservancy to do a desk study of what you could do for Howard Beach to make it more resilient, and they looked at, has anybody seen this study? It's been published for a few months. They looked at a number of different options, and they found that you couldn't do it with sort of nature-based features alone, but you could do a combination of those and some harder structures. And then they looked at how you would pay for that. And this is what I'm getting at, is one of the reasons certain measures don't move forward is you don't have a predictable regulatory environment. And if the reforms to the federal homeowners insurance, flood protection insurance hadn't changed, you could have actually you could have paid for the most expensive option or the most cost-effective option that they looked at with avoided flood insurance increases and gotten the benefit cost ratio of like 6-to-1. But because the Senate came in behind and relaxed the flood insurance provision, we've lost the opportunity to have a way to use that offset to pay for it. Now that was just a desk study, and it was just Howard Beach, and you probably wouldn't do it for just one place. But it was intriguing enough that you could then look at other places along Mid Bay or other enclosed bodies and figure out how much could you reduce the flood risk, like we saw with the Stevens model and some of the others, from waves and from surged by using these combined metrics, and is it enough that then you would actually be able to reduce the amount of flood that the buildings were likely to get, and then use that difference in cost to pay for the flood insurance? And it would be cheaper than any other option to pay for the flood insurance, or to avoid having to pay that flood insurance. And of course, Congress doesn't want the public debt to succumb to the delegation's request to not make the homeowners have to pay for their flood insurance in the short. But that's it's an alternative kind of market mechanism that you have to not give in to the public's demand to be able to live where they want to live in a very dangerous place without taking any personal responsibility for living there. But that was a real lost opportunity this year for that.
Any other questions out there? I see one, yes.
I was wondering if you can comment on how much effort is going into harnessing some of the Manhattan wealth, private donors towards resilience and restoration activities.
I haven't had much fun handling, but maybe, the private one at the top.
I mean, the private wealth, not the big foundations like ours?
No,
Yes.
private.
So have you been able to, working through the philanthropic networks that Rockefeller does, generate, leverage more interest in income? And actually, let me convert this into a final question for the entire panel. Sandy's in the rearview mirror. We haven't been hit yet by another storm, although it seems to be wacky weather everywhere, right? Given the tough congressional situation, given the always dynamic local political situation, what can we do at this moment in time to garner resources and funding? What's the most important thing from your perspective, philanthropically, governmentally, to make sure your overlords, the people that make decisions, philanthropic and governmental decisions, what's best? And then we can answer that question.
Well, from my perspective, I think one of the more important things is to get the word out more towards, for example, the work that the Port Authority is doing. I don't know that there is enough visibility of this that it really becomes that important to the Board of Commissioners that such a program continues to exist. I mean, we've gotten some great support from a handful of people that are sort of in the know about the Natural Resource Acquisition Program, but certainly if there were greater interest and outcry about it, it would get more support, I think.
Yeah, I'll agree, and I'll echo what Lilo said about elected officials responding to constituents. It's really powerful, and for example, there was a gas pipeline that shall remain nameless, and there were local advocates who, FERC, no FERC, they didn't care about what process was going on. They said, we want mitigation, we want mitigation, we want mitigation. And that, quite frankly, makes it easier for regulators to get more mitigation when the community is really actively, asking for and demanding for mitigation. And so those voices are heard. I think we all get a little cynical about whether our voices are heard, but they really truly are. And I would say the Rebuild by Design project on Staten Island is another example. I mean, I think that the Escape team did a really great job engaging the local community, but the local community itself was saying, was very vocal about we want something, we want a solution, we want something. And so, I think I think that people are greater advocates to our higher ups than we can be in many instances.
Nancy, to answer that question, if you respond, many of us know, I think like 80 or 85% of philanthropy in America is from individuals. Obviously, Rockefeller Foundation has a leader, but many in the foundation community have come to the fore, pre-Sandy, certainly post-Sandy, on resiliency. Do you think we're making any traction with the private donor? And if not, what do you think we can do to make it happen?
Well, there was a coalition of funders who joined us in Rebuild by Design, but they weren't the individual private donors. Individual private donors, first of all, they tend to give to churches. Secondly, if they give to, or to pets. Secondly, if they give to anything in this area, it's going to be for disaster relief. And so we put an article in to try to convince the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, something like that, that they should stop thinking about disaster philanthropy and think more about resilience. And I don't think we're going to shift many people, because there's something about human nature that, you know, responds to Susie in the well, or, you know, responds to the immediate. So I feel really good that we've shifted the big government systems people to where we are today. That was, you know, one of the goals I set out for myself when I went to the foundation. But institutions have the job to think about how they think about things, and individuals don't necessarily. So that's like another whole game, and I'm not sure I'm gonna take that one on. So I don't really know about whether we're gonna get individual donors shifted out of helping poor people in need at the moment that they need it, because you don't necessarily want people to stop giving to that either. So that's, I think, how I would answer that for the moment. It's a whole different part of the giving brain.
And it's, I think, part of that communication strategy. we have
Oh,
to-
you know, but I want to answer,
Right.
there's something I wanted to mention, which is, I think, running counter to at least what Venetia said, which is, you know, it is much more likely that the next horrible thing that happens in New York is a heat wave. And heat waves are the deadliest impact from climate change. So they're not as dramatic looking as the coastal storms, and they don't have a huge ecological component except for the tree cover. But I think that if you don't want to lose the kind of support from the philanthropists, for example, and then also like the Homeland Security and the parts of the government that have been supporting this resilience building that includes ecological restoration, then at least some of you have to be able to think holistically and be able to explain how what you're doing fits with a broader resilience agenda that includes people and includes what to do in the case of heat waves, and how that affects people, even though that might not be the heart of your mission, because that's A, more likely, and B, going to be devastating, and all of a sudden it'll be, you know, like we're all like kids on a soccer field chasing the coastal storm and what we do about it, and there's going to be heat waves, we're all going to be kids on the soccer field chasing the heat wave and what we do about it. And nothing that you guys are in this room care about is over here. So you have to figure out how you're also over there, and maybe some of you will meet it. And that would be even better. But if you want to be relevant when it moves to heat wave, you have to be a little bit more than the fish and the community and stuff.
I guess that's the noble close on. Thank you very much to the panel. Big hand.